Hello, it's Thursday, September the 17th in the year 2020. Welcome to YouTube video number 96 in this series exposing the Jesuit Vatican shadow empire as the true cause of all revolution, genocide, and war for the last 500 years, and the one and only candidate for the fourth beast system described in the prophetic books of Daniel and Revelation in the Bible. I want to talk a bit today about the formation of the Roman constructed planet Earth concentration camp prison system we find ourselves in today, and which has been illustrated in various ways in many Hollywood movies over the decades. We are now living in that reality. We're living in it, people. We are living in a prison camp, a world prison camp. This camp appears invisible to humanity, but many sense the encroachment of punishment, retribution, retaliation, and a form of New World Order rehabilitation into their lives. Now, these are four really important concepts to consider: punishment, retribution, retaliation, and rehabilitation. These are all a part of punishment and incarceration. And I want to look today at how this has come to be to where we are today. We have watched personal privacy virtually disappear as every manner of surveillance intrudes into our lives under the guise of safety and security. Now, this is found in the Bible, where Paul warns that when they are shouting safety, peace, security, then sudden destruction will fall upon them. And we are living in that time, people. It's here, right now, all around us. There are no walls or bars evident to us. No walls or bars. But then again, there is no need for them. There's no need for them. People have ceased to question, but rather accept this surveillance and loss of privacy as a beneficial thing. In the same unthinking manner, they just comply with every fascist rule and regulation designed to remove their sovereign rights under God to move about on the earth in an unrestricted manner, say yes or no regarding personal life choices, and to breathe freely in an unrestricted manner. So these are rights that we have under God on the earth. But of course, these rights have been taken away. And we can see this in the worldwide masking program of all human souls. It's absolutely amazing to watch people comply with this system without virtually no protest, just in a few countries. Surveillance and incarceration are Jesuit specialties. Now remember, in the past, only offenders, criminal offenders were incarcerated and put under surveillance. But today, the whole human race have become criminal offenders. They're seen as protagonists against the Roman government system. And as such, they are all going to be put under incarceration and surveillance. And once this system is instituted, it can never be rolled back. Never. It's done forever, for all time, until the end of this age, when Jesus Christ returns and sets up his kingdom and destroys this evil system that is now attempting to imprison all human souls. In rejecting God's kind and loving rulership, the people of the world have consented, knowingly or not, to Satan's brutal, merciless rulership under Rome. This is where we are right now. First, I want to describe Satan's strategy and his use of the Jesuits to institute his open prison. Now remember, the Jesuits are just the final iteration of the Luciferian Babylonian priesthood, which maintained total control over the population through fear and punishment. That's right. We're just living in the last form of this control, which is now manifesting itself over every human being. Remember that from the beginning, Satan deceived Adam and Eve, and they lost their authority over the earth and their home in paradise. They were protected, sheltered, secure. There was peace and joy and love in Eden. They gave it away by submitting themselves to Satan and his authority. They handed over the authority they had to the devil, and he's had it ever since. He's been playing havoc on the earth through all his tyrants and tin pot dictators and empires that he set up over the last 6,000 years. Eden was a paradise in which Adam and Eve were royalty under God's guidance and protection. They were thrust out into the world now under Satan's authority because they had given him that authority by obeying him. Can you see how important it is, this principle of obedience? To whom you obey, that is whom you are a slave or a servant to. It's about authority. When Adam and Eve gave up God's authority and chose Satan's authority, they lost everything that they had. They lost their eternal life. They lost freedom. They lost health. They lost everything and became prisoners to Satan on his prison planet. Now we are just at the very last period of time where Satan is setting up his final concentration camp. Basically, that's what it is. We're now living in a concentration camp, and everyone is going to be chipped and controlled. So, men who rejected God's authority have been living under Satan's authority and rule ever since through the despotic rulers of evil that Satan raised up at the head of the various empires throughout history. Now, a great book about this is Rulers of Evil by F. Tupper Saucy, who explains how this rule of evil has been given over to a group of men. In every age, this group of men lay hold to the claim that they have the right to rule other human beings under this rule of evil. And we are living in that last period of time. So, if you get a chance, read Rulers of Evil by Tupper Saucy. I've placed the free download, PDF download, in the description box, and you can go there and read this book yourself. It is an excellent book and describes where we have come from and where we are today, and who the rulers of evil are. The Jesuit military order of Rome. The first ruler of evil was Cain, who became Sargon the Great, a great dictator in the pre-flood antediluvian era. And there is actually records of this Sargon the Great being Cain, and you can actually find information about that. And F. Tupper Saucy talks about this in his book, Rulers of Evil. Satan's strategy has been fourfold and has not deviated since the beginning. He follows the same plan. He hates mankind who are created in the image of God. This is a very important point to note. We are made in the image of God. Satan hates that because he is not made in the image of God. He is not. He is an angel. He is a created being, just like us, but he is not made in the image of God. The only way he can take revenge on God is to destroy God's creation, of which man is the pinnacle. We are the pinnacle. We are very special to God, and God cares for us, wants us to return under his authority, back into relationship with him. And of course, Satan wants to stop that and destroy as many people as possible. And this is his war against God. Number one, the first point, Satan first attacked and destroyed man's authority over the earth under God, thus corrupting all things, corrupting the creation. And that's where we've been ever since the beginning. We've been living in a corrupted creation, not subject totally to God's authority and kingship. Number two, at the same time, Satan severed man's relationship with God through disobedience and rebellion. And that's what we've seen. 6,000 years of disobedience and rebellion, and people creating empires and enslaving people. That's basically what we've seen, right down until virtually the present time. Number three, Satan's aim has always been to destroy God's image in man. He does this through unnatural sex, drugs, or sorcery, from which the Greek word is pharmakios, from where we get the word sorcery, or pharmaceuticals. These are drugs. It's a form of sorcery. And witchcraft and demonic possession. This is how he manipulates people and changes that image of God into an image that partially serves the devil and his purposes. These practices are forbidden by God, so Satan lures people into these traps in order to defile the image they were made in. His ultimate goal is to corrupt the DNA of every human in order to make them unredeemable or irredeemable. They cannot be redeemed by God because they become something other. Their image has been changed into a mutant or monster type character. I believe this is what was going on in the days of Noah. And now, having come full circle 4,500 years later, Satan is laying the same trap for humanity under the lie of what is falsely called science or knowledge. Now, you can read about this in 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 20 to 21, where Paul writes, "O Timothy, keep that which is committed to your trust, avoiding profane and vain babblings, useless debates and arguments, and the opposition of science, falsely so called, which some professing have erred concerning the faith." So we can see that there is a false knowledge that rules the earth today. It's a pseudoscience. The fictions of deep space, the fictions of vaccines, the fictions of transhumanism, these are all false sciences, falsely called knowledge, falsely called science. And these are being used by Satan, linked with sorcery and magic, to control the human race. Everyone's under a spell, people. The whole world is under an incredibly powerful satanic spell. And God is allowing this to happen. He's allowing this delusion to happen so that all who reject him will be destroyed and damned forever. It is his just punishment on people who refuse to repent of their sins and turn to God. Number 4, finally, Satan wants to imprison man on God's creation by destroying his civil and religious freedoms and his eternal life with God. Now, this is coming very, very soon with the Mark of the Beast vaccine. He will accomplish this goal of destroying everything, and including the image of God that man was made in. All of history is a record of Satan raising up despotic kings and empire builders whose main goal was to conquer the world and bring all people into subjection to idolatry and man-god worship. From Nimrod's Babel, Babylon, Persia, Media, Greece, Rome, and finishing with the Roman Catholic fourth beast of Daniel Empire. That's all we've seen is man-god emperor worship. And of course, the Pope, the dynasty of popes, and the final Pope is the last man-god deity that will demand to be worshipped, and whom God, Jesus Christ, will destroy when he returns. Let's have a brief look at an overview of the history of incarceration. This is important to understand because there is a history of imprisonment going way back to the beginning by the rulers of evil in every period of time, in every age over the last 6,000 years. Let's have a look at the ancient and medieval period. And a lot of this information is common knowledge, and I've drawn it from Wikipedia, and I'll read it for whoever wants to listen. And I'll stop here and there and interject, and I'll put the links again in the description box below, so you can go there and read it for yourself. The use of prisons can be traced back to the rise of the state as a form of social organization, and we apply this to empire, right? State, empire, it's the same thing. Corresponding with the advent of the state was the development of written language, which enabled the creation of formalized legal codes as official guidelines for society. The best known of these early legal codes is the Code of Hammurabi, written in Babylon around 1750 BC. The penalties for violations of the laws in Hammurabi's code were almost exclusively centered on the concept of lex talionis, or the law of retaliation, one of the four principles I started off this video with. Retaliation, whereby people were punished as a form of vengeance, often by the victims themselves. So the victims were allowed to take vengeance on those who had committed some kind of crime. Then this notion of punishment as vengeance or retaliation can also be found in many other legal codes from early civilizations, including the ancient Sumerian codes, the Indian Manusmriti, or the Manava Dharma Sastra, the Hermes Trismegistus of Egypt, and the Israelite Mosaic Law. Now, I want to put a disclaimer in there about the Israelite Mosaic Law. Now, that was not a law of retaliation by people as much as it was a obedience to commandment of God. Now, this is the difference. A man-made law and a God-ordained law. There's a little bit of difference there. It is not God retaliating or taking retribution against people who offended the law. It is a form of divinely ordained punishment for disobeying God and leading others into disobedience. The end result of which we know, if this course of disobedience is allowed to continue, it leads whole of society into chaos and anarchy. And that is why the Mosaic Law was laid down as a form of societal pattern by which all people, if they adhere to it, that justice and fairness would absolutely pervade all of society. So there's a bit of a difference to man-made laws and God-ordained laws, and it's important to make that distinction. A common punishment in 17th century early modern Europe was to be made a galley slave on a boat. This involved chaining prisoners together in the bottoms of ships and forcing them to row on naval or merchant vessels. Some ancient Greek philosophers, such as Plato, began to develop ideas using punishment to reform offenders instead of simply using it as punishment, so as punishment as reform. Imprisonment as a penalty was used initially for those who could not afford to pay their fines. Eventually, since impoverished Athenians could not pay their fines, leading to indefinite periods of imprisonment, time limits were set instead. The prison in ancient Athens was known as the Desmoterion, or the place of chains. So there's all these different concepts of imprisonment leading down to where we are today. And it's important to understand this. The Romans were among the first to use prisons as a form of punishment rather than simply of detention. A variety of existing structures were used to house prisoners, such as metal cages, basements of public buildings, and quarries. Forced labor on public works projects was also a common form of punishment. And this is how a lot of the infrastructure, public infrastructure in Rome was created. It was built by slave labor or criminal labor as punishment. Forced labor on public works projects was also a common form of punishment. In many cases, citizens were sentenced to slavery, often in ergastula, a primitive form of prison where unruly slaves were chained to workbenches and performed hard labor. During the Middle Ages in Europe, castles, fortresses, and the basements of public buildings were often used as makeshift prisons. The possession of the right and the capability to imprison citizens, however, granted an air of legitimacy to officials at all levels of government, from kings to regional courts to city councils, and the ability to have someone imprisoned or killed served as a signifier of who in society possessed power or authority over others. Now, this is really important to understand, because here we've got the imposition of punishment and execution, giving the legal authority to those who pass down these sentences. So whether these people who were subject to these sentences were guilty or innocent made no difference, though everyone recognized that the people in power, the rulers of evil of each period of time, had the power over life and death. So it kept people from transgressing. The influence of French philosopher Michel Foucault, especially his book Discipline and Punish, The Birth of the Prison in 1975, published in 1975, has energized the historical study of prisons and their role in the overall social system. Foucault's book is an analysis of the social and theoretical mechanisms behind the changes that occurred in Western penal systems during the modern age based on historical documents from France. Foucault argues that prison did not become the principal form of punishment just because of the humanitarian concern of reformists. He traces the cultural shifts that led to the predominance of prison via the body and power. Prison used by the disciplines, new technological powers that can also be found, according to Foucault, in places such as schools, hospitals, and military barracks. Now remember here that Foucault had no knowledge, as far as I know, of the Jesuits and their control over the whole world system for at least the last 200 years. So whether he was working with this knowledge or not, I don't know. But what he wrote about prisons helped us to understand a little bit more about the reason why prisons were developed and how they're used to control transgression within society. From the late 17th century and during the 18th century, popular resistance to public execution and torture became more widespread, both in Europe and in the United States. People were appalled by how prisoners, and sometimes prisoners who had offended in a very, very light manner, were being treated by the powers to be, governments. Particularly under the Bloody Code, with few sentencing alternatives, imposition of the death penalty for petty crimes such as theft was proving increasingly unpopular with the public. Many jurors were refusing to convict defendants of petty crimes when they knew the defendants would be sentenced to death. Rulers began looking for means to punish and control their subjects in a way that did not cause people to associate them with spectacles of tyrannical and sadistic violence. They developed systems of mass incarceration, often with hard labor, as a solution. Now remember that during this 15, 16, 17th centuries, we've got the Inquisition and the persecution of people for their religious beliefs. This is not mentioned here, but many of these people were incarcerated for long periods of time, tortured, and eventually killed. So mixed in with this whole history of prisons and incarceration, surveillance, we have the Inquisitions, which rolled on for about 800 years in different ways, shapes, and forms, and which added to the methods of punishment that civil authorities, under Jesuit control, would then apply to their citizens. Now, anybody could become a target, particularly if they refused to go along or comply with the religious system, which was Catholic at the time in many of the countries of Europe. So this is all mixed together. Punishment, incarceration, torture, and people could be accused falsely under the religious system for civil offenses and then executed. And this happened a lot. Many, many innocent victims were put to death because of their religious convictions, using different charges. The prison reform movement that arose at this time was heavily influenced by two somewhat contradictory philosophies. The first was based in Enlightenment ideas of utilitarianism and rationalism, and suggested that prisons should simply be used as a more effective substitute for public corporal punishment such as whipping, hanging, etc. This theory, referred to as deterrence, claims that the primary purpose of prisons is to be so harsh and terrifying that they deter people from committing crimes out of fear of going to prison. Now, this is really based on inquisitional torture and execution. This nasty retribution towards people who've committed any kind of offense is Jesuitical in origin, Roman Catholic in origin. The second theory, which saw prisons as a form of rehabilitation or moral reform, was based on religious ideas that equated crime with sin, and saw prisons as a place to instruct prisoners in Christian morality, obedience, and proper behavior. These later reformers believed that prisons could be constructed as humane institutions of moral instruction, and that prisoners' behavior could be corrected so that when they were released they would be model members of society. And that's why we have today this idea of correctional facilities. Many prisons are called correctional facilities. It comes from this idea of correcting people's behavior. Well, of course, this idea is nice. It's humanitarian. But unless a person's spirit, unless their mind is transformed by the Word of God, they will be released to reoffend because they have no fear of God. So, of course, these systems have a very, very poor track record of reforming or correcting a person's behavior in most cases. The concept of the modern prison was imported to Europe in the early 19th century. Punishment usually consisted of physical forms of punishment, including capital punishment, mutilation, flagellation, whipping, branding, and non-physical punishments such as public shaming rituals like the stocks, which we can see many pictures of. People being put in the stocks in a public place and humiliated by the public. From the Middle Ages up to the 16th and 17th centuries in Europe, imprisonment was rarely used as a punishment in its own right, and prisons were mainly to hold those awaiting trial and convicts awaiting punishment. A lot of this is mixed up with Roman Catholic retributive punishments and public humiliations and executions, and it's important to understand this. Now, at some point in time, the concept of transportation, prison ships, and penal colonies arose, and I think particularly in Britain. And again, these ideas are based on punishment and retribution. England used penal transportation of convicted criminals and others generally young and poor for a term of indentured servitude within the general population of British America between the 1610s and 1776. That's interesting, 1776, because this is when the Jesuits were, this is the formation of the Illuminati in Europe by Adam Weishaupt, and also this is the period of time when the Jesuits were suppressed and went underground. The Transportation Act of 1717 made this option available for lesser crimes, or offered it by discretion as a longer-term alternative to the death penalty, which could theoretically be imposed for the growing number of offenses in Britain. The substantial expansion of transportation was the first major innovation in 18th century British penal practice. And transportation to America was abruptly suspended by the Criminal Law Act of 1776 with the start of the American Revolution or Rebellion. While sentencing to transportation continued, the Act instituted a punishment policy of hard labor instead. The suspension of transport also prompted the use of prisons for punishment and the initial start of a prison building program. Britain would resume transportation to specifically planned penal colonies in Australia between 1788 and 1868. And in my opinion, transportation was an excuse for slave labor in order to build the colonies without significant cost to the Crown. Nothing has really changed because prisoners are still being used as cheap labor for the private controllers of prisons today, which are in the hands of private businesses controlled by the Jesuits. So we see going way back to the Romans and using criminals, people who have been charged with criminal offenses, as slave labor to build roads and buildings, public infrastructure, bridges. They're still doing it today. Nothing has changed. This is Roman. This idea is Roman. And you have to understand this. This is where it comes from, because Rome rules the world and rules all the penal systems, right? They understand how these systems work. They've been constructing them and working with them for 2,000 years, more than 2,000 years. Jails at that time in the 17th century were run as business ventures and contained both felons and debtors, people who had fallen into debt, maybe through no fault of their own. The latter were often housed with their wives and younger children. You can see pictures of this, illustrations, and we can even see this. It's written about in some of Charles Dickens' classic novels. The jailers made their money by charging the inmates for food, drink, and other services, and the system was generally corruptible. In my opinion, transportation was an excuse for slave labor in order to build the colonies without significant cost to the Crown, which I mentioned before. Nothing has really changed because prisoners are still being used today as cheap labor. One reform of the 17th century was the establishment of the London Bridewell as a house of correction for women and children. It was the first facility to make any medical services available to prisoners. Now, the reason I'm going through this history is because I'm taking us down from Rome, from ancient times down to modern times, and you can see that it is the Roman Luciferian influence over control of prisons and these systems that brings us to the final open prison on planet Earth. It all leads one into another. With the widely used alternative of penal transportation halted in the 1770s, the immediate need for additional penal accommodations emerged, and then this is where we get the idea of old sailing boats being turned into prisons. They were called hulks or prison hulks, and I do believe this was illustrated in Charles Dickens' book, Great Expectations. So this is a fact of history. Everything I'm reading is a fact of history. It says here, while the conditions on these ships were generally appalling, their use and the labor thus provided set a precedent which persuaded many people that mass incarceration and labor were viable methods of crime prevention and punishment. This all works to the benefit of the secular government, right? And now it works to the benefit of private business, because most prisons, especially in the United States and I believe also Europe, are run by private enterprise. And these are Jesuitical Masonic businesses making profit from prisoners. The turn of the 19th century would see the first movement toward prison reform, and by the 1810s, the first state prisons and correctional facilities were built, thereby inaugurating the modern prison facilities available today. France also sent criminals to overseas penal colonies, including Louisiana, in the early 18th century. Penal colonies in French Guiana operated until 1952, such as the notable Devil's Island. And you can see this Devil's Island illustrated in the movie from the 70s called Papillon. Right? Katorga prisons were harsh work camps established in the 17th century in Russia. In remote underpopulated areas of Siberia and the Russian Far East that had few towns or food sources, Siberia quickly gained its fearful connotation of punishment, and of course was continued by the Jesuits under the communist Soviet government for decades under Lenin and Stalin. And these people were controlled by the Jesuits. Stalin was a Jesuit, and that is documented. So looking at the prison reform movement, which began somewhere in the early 1800s, we see the arrival of Jeremy Bentham and his Panopticon prison concept, designed in 1758, introduced many of the principles of surveillance and social control that underpinned the design of the modern prison. In the Panopticon model, prisoners were housed in one-person cells arranged in a circular pattern, all facing towards a central observation tower in such a way that the guards could see into all of the cells from the observation tower, while the prisoners were unable to see the guards. They didn't know whether they were being observed or not. This Panopticon idea is really critical, because soon all people will be herded into box-like apartments and will be under surveillance through cameras in the apartment, through appliances and devices in the apartment, through 5G network and grid, and through the chips put into their bodies. They will be under constant 24/7 surveillance. Their body functions will be monitored. Their actions will be monitored. What they say will be monitored. So you can see that the Panopticon idea of surveillance and imprisonment put together is exactly where the Jesuits are bringing us today, to a world open prison system, Panopticon system, where everyone is chipped and under surveillance. This is what is occurring right now, and it will be complete when everybody receives the Mark of the Beast 3-in-1 vaccine, which I have talked about in previous videos. So it's really important, this concept of imprisonment and surveillance, how they come together in this final Roman beast world system, and how all people will be enslaved and controlled. Really important to understand this. This is exactly, we're on the cusp of it right now, people. We're on the cusp of it right now. Moving on. After having visited several hundred prisons across England and Europe in his capacity as High Sheriff of Bedfordshire, John Howard published The State of the Prisons in 1777. He was particularly appalled to discover prisoners who had been acquitted but were still confined because they could not pay the jailers' fees. He proposed wide-ranging reforms to the system, including the housing of each prisoner in a separate cell. And we have this reform which begins around this time. The Prison Reform Charity, the Howard League for Penal Reform, was established in 1866 by his admirers. Following Howard's agitation, the Penitentiary Act was passed in 1779. This introduced solitary confinement, religious instruction, a labor regime, and proposed 2 state penitentiaries, one for men and one for women. However, these were never built due to disagreements in the committee and pressures from wars with France, and jails remained a local responsibility. But other measures passed in the next few years provided magistrates with the powers to implement many of these reforms, and eventually in 1815 jail fees were abolished. This is what kept many people in prison. They were so poor they could not pay the jail fees and get free, even though they were innocent. They had been, their charges had been dropped. And again, Quakers, the Quaker religious movement, the Quakers were prominent in campaigning against and publicizing the dire state of the prisons at the time. And we get people like Elizabeth Fry documenting the conditions that prevailed at Newgate Prison in London. And Fry was able to found a prison school for the children who were imprisoned with their parents. So you get religious people now stepping in and trying to alleviate the suffering by many prisoners. She also began a system of supervision and required the women to sew and to read the Bible. Again, you've got the imposition of religious duties put upon people who essentially do not want to serve God. It doesn't work. It just doesn't work. First of all, the heart and the mind must be changed in order for people to understand that their actions or their former actions were wrong and even sinful. In 1817, this woman, Elizabeth Fry, helped found the Association for the Reformation of the Female Prisoners in Newgate. Now, these actions went a long way to changing the prison system down to modern time. So the development of the modern prison system came about through Jeremy Bentham again, and his Panopticon idea, which introduced the principle of observation and control that underpins the design of the modern prison. The notion of prisoners being incarcerated as part of their punishment and not simply as a holding state until trial or hanging was at the time revolutionary. His views influenced the establishment of the first prisons used as criminal rehabilitation or correctional centers. At a time when the implementation of capital punishment for a variety of relatively trivial offenses was on the decline, the notion of incarceration as a form of punishment and correction held great appeal to reform-minded thinkers and politicians. So in the first half of the 19th century, capital punishment came to be regarded as inappropriate for many crimes that it had previously been carried out for. And by the mid-19th century, imprisonment had replaced the death penalty for the most serious offenses except for murder. The Jesuits have been watching and learning, and they've been behind a lot of these ideas. They've been learning how to imprison and enslave people for centuries, and in fact perfected communism in their Paraguayan reductions during the 16th and 17th centuries in South America. And you can read about that. This is documented. Communism is the same as Catholicism. It is absolute spiritual and temporal control of the many, of each individual through force and fear by the few, by the Jesuit elite, by the Luciferian elite. It's important to understand this connection between Catholicism, communism, incarceration, retribution, punishment. They all go together. It's a matrix of ideas that need to be understood as one. And they're all coming together very, very soon under this one world, New World Order Jesuit system. Let's talk about intelligence and spying, because this goes together with the Jesuits. They are the masters of intelligence and spying. They formed modern intelligence and spying agencies. And it goes together with incarceration, punishment, surveillance, particularly to do with surveillance, watching people, tracking their movements, digging up the dirt against them to be used against them in unlawful and illegal manners. Now, the Jesuits are experts at this, and know every trick in the book because they wrote the book. So let's have a look at this. It's important to note that the Jesuits established through their Roman Catholic or Masonic agents all the modern world intelligence agencies or surveillance agencies. The Jesuits are the masters of intelligence gathering. These agencies have all been working together under the direction of the Jesuits since 1917 and the Russian Revolution. 100%. There's no such thing as antagonism between nations because the Jesuits control all the nations. They applied what they learned from the French Revolution with precision. And the Jesuits did form, foment, and control the French Revolution. Everything we have learned about East-West aggression in the 20th century is a lie perpetuated by the Jesuits, all orchestrated to create division and promote suspicion, fear, and conflict between nations and tribes and peoples. The Jesuits are the first modern spies and undercover agents. They created the rule book on intelligence, and I talk about this in a previous video about the myth of James Bond, 007, and the Jesuits. And you can go there and you can listen to a little bit more information on this subject. They created the rule book on intelligence and intelligence gathering. There is no doubt that Lorenzo Ricci, the 18th Superior General or Black Pope of the Jesuits, wrote The Art of War, which was then attributed to Sun Tzu, a fictitious and legendary Chinese general from the Sui period of Chinese history. And that's a whole subject in itself. There is little evidence that this character actually existed or wrote this book. The Jesuits waged war against humanity using the precepts of psychological war from this brilliantly written book. Psychology and the use of propaganda. The Jesuits are masters. And through this, psychological war and propaganda now control the human race. They've got everybody wearing a mask, when in fact there is no virus. There is no virus. There's no pandemic. And they've got everybody wearing a mask. Is that brilliant? Is that control? Yes, it is. And most of these people wearing a mask will take the 3-in-1 Mark of the Beast vaccine, which is coming very soon. So, the Jesuits waged war against humanity using the precepts of psychological war and propaganda from this brilliantly written book. We have been living in the surveillance society for many decades now. Many decades. I would say virtually the whole 20th century, right up to where we are now. The Jesuits have been creating a worldwide Panopticon for social control step by step using high-tech surveillance to track individual movements and habits. It's the reason why they put a mobile phone in everybody's hand, why they made it absolutely necessary to have a mobile phone. They have been warning us over the last 100 years in popular culture what they were planning, but everyone thought it was fiction, just entertainment. Little did we know growing up what was coming and where we are right now. The world is now an open prison. Yes, it is, folks. The world is now an open prison. Everyone is being surveilled and monitored through their mobile phones, through TV screens, through Internet of Things devices that have been implanted with microchips. Everyone, worldwide, we're being surveilled from the air, from cell phone towers, through devices, and there is no escape. There's nowhere to go. So if you think you can bug out and escape the system, you are seriously misled. There's nowhere to go. People are increasingly losing their freedoms and anonymity because of cell phone and rapidly multiplying IoT or Internet of Things device placement all around us. Surveillance and incarceration have fused to become one reality, one of civil and religious servitude to the beast. The surveillance panopticon, this new open prison society where freedom is fast becoming just a memory. Remember that the Jesuits formed the OSS using Roman Catholic Knight of Malta Bill Donovan back in the 30s or 40s, before it became the CIA. We've got world intelligence organizations, ASIO in Australia, CSIS in Canada, CIA in the United States, NZSIS in New Zealand, MI5. These form the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, or FVEY, founded in 1941. This goes back pre-Second World War. We've got Mossad in Israel, also formed by the Jesuits through their Zionist, communist Jews. We've got the MSS in China, which totally controls China with an iron fist and links together with all these other agencies. They're all working together, all controlled from Rome by the Black Pope. Arturo Sosa is the current Black Pope, and he controls all these agencies through his 10 generals and through their 10 Jesuit assistancies that the world is divided up into. They control all these intelligence agencies monitoring all the people of the world. There is no division. They all communicate together. It is one system, not many systems. Cannot stress this enough. There is no division between any of these nations. They are all controlled by the Jesuits. The methods of surveillance are CCTV cameras, Internet of Things, implanted devices, smartphone, Internet protocol or IP addresses, smartwatches, and other Internet of Things IP device or addresses through which the Jesuits monitor everything. Don't think that you're out of their sphere of influence. They're everywhere around you. You're being monitored. In Wikipedia, again, in 2013, documents supposedly leaked by the former NSA contractor Edward Snowden revealed the existence of numerous surveillance programs jointly operated by the Five Eyes. Now, listen, Edward Snowden, Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning, all these people are all controlled by the Jesuits. They're giving you something, they're not telling you the whole story. They are PSYOP. They are a psychological operation against humanity to make you believe that these people are victims, that they're releasing information, that they are heroes. They are not. They are totally controlled by the Jesuits. You cannot operate with impunity in the world today without direct retribution from the Jesuits. These people are working with the system, but telling you something. They'll tell you something, but they won't tell you all. They won't tell you the full story. They can't. They'll be killed. So these documents leaked by Edward Snowden, they're to let us know. The Jesuits gloat. They love to let you know how they control everything. They won't tell you who they are. They won't tell you who they are. These people will never tell you. Most internet channels will never tell you that it's the Jesuits sitting behind, pulling the strings and levers of world power. They won't tell you. I'm telling you, and I'm still on the internet, and it's amazing that I am. If you have the chance to download or record my videos, do so, because they could soon disappear. But what I'm telling you is 100% truth. My video, by the way, all my videos are uploaded to my website, darknessisfalling.com, and you can watch them all there. That website might be around for a while until everything switches over, but you can go there if they disappear. If my videos disappear off YouTube, you can go and watch them all at darknessisfalling.com. There's 4 pages there of all my uploaded videos. Now, Edward Snowden reported that there organizations like PRISM, P-R-I-S-M, operated by the NSA together with other organizations. Another one is called X-Keyscore, operated by the NSA, National Security Agency of the USA. Another one is called Tempora, operated by GCHQ, with contributions from the NSA. You can see all these organizations are working together. How could they work together unless they were controlled by the same entity? And they are. There's another one called muscular, operated by GCHQ and the NSA. Another one called stateroom, operated by the ASD, CIA, CSE, GCHQ, and NSA. Now, you can go and look at and check all these security agencies online. Just put them into Wikipedia and you'll find them all. In 2013, it was reported that Germany was interested in joining the Five Eyes Alliance. The Five Eyes Alliance is very important. It's been operating since 1941, collects data worldwide, and feeds it directly to the Jesuits. At that time, 2013, several members of the United States Congress, including Tim Ryan and Charles Dent, were pushing for Germany's entrance to the Five Eyes Alliance. Israel, Singapore, South Korea, and Japan are collaborating with Five Eyes. You see, they're all working together. There is no East and West. There's no North and South. They're all working together. All these agencies. How could they do that if they're opposing each other or fighting each other? It's all nonsense. Created by the fake news in the media, which is also controlled by the Jesuits. You've got the Nine Eyes Alliance, which includes, and they work together with the Five Eyes, which includes Denmark, France, the Netherlands, and Norway. Then you've got the 14 Eyes. It's a map of 14 Eyes countries. And they also work with the Five Eyes and the Nine Eyes. It's amazing. And these also include Belgium, Germany, Italy, Spain, and Sweden. Let me repeat. The farce and fiction of world division and suspicion between nations created and fostered by the Jesuits' 44-year-long Cold War. And yes, it was a Jesuit Cold War. It was an intelligence war. Fostered is a deception. To foster this deception and maintain the illusion that nations are independent and sovereign when they're not. There's no such thing as a sovereign or independent nation in the world today. Every nation has a Roman proxy governor, making sure that all nations are compliant to Roman law. All politics is public theater. It's a farce. They're all following a script. Elections and voting are a hoax to maintain the illusion of democracy and sovereignty. They do not exist. Let me repeat, democracy, freedom, does not exist anywhere and hasn't for at least 50 years. We've all been living in a liberal, fascist system that allows us certain freedoms, but we have never been truly free. The Jesuits and their puppets have deceived everyone for a long, long time. Okay, COVID-19, it's the back door to destroying personal privacy. COVID-19 is the problem that brings the vaccine solution to forever access the back door to destroying personal privacy. The vaccine is the false promise of safety and security. True security and safety are only found in God, not in man-made agencies. If you're trusting in man-made agencies, I advise you to stop it. They are all betraying you and work for Rome. COVID-19 is the game changer for all humanity. Using this virus fiction as a lever, the Jesuits are about to pull off their master stroke. Using the Hegelian problem, reaction, solution formula, they will succeed in the total enslavement of mankind. This will be achieved with the 3-in-1 vaccine by inserting in each human body nanochips that will hold all personal ID and allow the real-time tracking of any individual via cell phone app and 5G technology. People are going to be tagged and tracked like cattle or worse, like wild animals. Very soon, cameras, computers, and cell phones alone will no longer be required to perform this function. Each vaccinated person will carry in their body the very shackles, the chains that will imprison them. The real-time, real-world Panopticon is soon to be complete. Each individual will never be able to see or know who is watching them or tracking them. A person with cells and walls will no longer be required. A prison with cells and walls will no longer be required to identify and track an individual's every movement and physical emotional status. There will be no escape to anywhere for the vaccinated individual, and even if they wanted to, they would be cut off from their digital money supply, will only be available through the mark in their right hand or forehead. The Jesuits have been creating a worldwide panopticon for social control step by step using high-tech surveillance to track individual movements and habits. We have been being tracked for a long time now, decades. They have been warning us since 100 years ago in popular culture what they were planning, but everyone thought it was fiction. They thought it was just entertainment. The world is now an open prison. People are increasingly losing their freedoms and anonymity because of cell phone and rapidly multiplying, again, IoT device placement. The world open system of incarceration doles out punishment, retribution, and retaliation, but no rehabilitation. Not really. Only rehabilitation in the sense that you will be a prisoner and under papal control. There is no out for the vaccinated individual. No relief, no mercy, no forgiveness. Think about the horror of this world beast system. These people will be trapped in a system of suffering and torment forever. Forever. No way out. So the world panopticon Roman prison system leads to eternal hell and damnation. There will be no way out forever. Now Revelation chapter 9 and verses 5 to 6 declares, "And to them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months. And their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when he strikes a man. And in those days shall men seek death, and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them." Well, what could cause that? What could cause that possibly? Well, I believe it's the vaccine that changes your DNA and you can't die. You have a form of temporary immortality on this earth. We have not seen this scenario from Revelation chapter 9 happen yet. But I believe the sting of the scorpion is the vaccine microneedle injection and the effects of it. Men will not be able to die because their DNA is being corrupted, causing a state of godless immortality. The Jesuits of Rome have been building their surveillance panopticon for 500 years. They've been reshaping societies worldwide, socially engineering societies worldwide into where we are headed right now. They now have absolute political and financial control over all nations. They control all intelligence and military forces. Using high-tech systems and AI software, they have created their system of communications upon which the whole world is now dependent. Incarceration and surveillance. These come together to form the Roman Jesuit world prison panopticon of surveillance and control. According to GSMA real-time intelligence data, today there are 5.22 billion people that have a mobile device in the world. This means that 66.83% of the world's population has a mobile device. And the mobile device will become very, very important in the beast system of control and tracking. This coverage is enough for the Jesuits and crucial to making their move now to vaccinate everyone. They don't need 5G everywhere. They don't. They've got 4G, 5G. It's enough. Anyone who asserts this, that they need 5G everywhere, just doesn't understand the Jesuits and the permeation of electromagnetic frequency signals everywhere across the flat earth plane today, via submarine cable and cell tower configurations, and many of which are transmitted aerially by high-tech balloons and airships, as well as TR-3BA electromagnetic levitational airships. That's how they do it. And we have pictures of the TR-3B levitating airships. And there are many of them working at high altitude across the earth today. They just need all vaccinated people to have access to a 4G or 5G muster point so they can report in on a regular basis for ID verification by scanning the mark in their right hand or in their forehead with their cell phone and to perform digital money transactions. The cell phone coverage is crucial for vaccinated people to interact with the beast system. Or Apple Watches, whatever system can be given to people by which they can scan. That's all it takes, a scan and a signal to connect to a cell tower, a levitational airship, submarine cables, a Wi-Fi router, whatever. That's all it takes. And the world is covered today with electromagnetic frequency signals. All right? The cell phone coverage is crucial. All those who refuse to join the beast cell grid or electromagnetic frequency grid and be vaccinated will be exterminated. There'll be no use for you. You're not wanted. You don't belong in the system. Also, you will not be able to survive in the system without being able to buy or sell via this electromagnetic grid, frequency grid. I would like to warn all of you who are listening that the vast majority of YouTube so-called truth channels are not telling the whole truth about what I have just described. Most channels are talking about the symptoms or effects and not about the cause. They're talking about politics. They're talking about bugging out. They're talking about 5G. They're talking about the vaccine. But they're not talking about the Jesuits who are behind all of these things. They're not talking about the Jesuits control all these forces and are the cause of all these symptoms. I'm here telling you what the cause is. And many channels will not tell you. They'll tell you 90% of the truth, maybe 80%. They will not tell you 100%. Most channels are talking about the symptoms or effects of what is happening in the world today, and not about who is doing it. They are misinforming, misleading people about the root cause of all the world's problems, which is the Vatican and its Jesuit military order. And you can read about it in Revelation. Revelation describes the Roman Catholic system. Describes it. This harlot, whore, beast system. If a channel refuses to talk about the Roman Catholic cult as being the root of all world problems, then beware. I'm warning you now. You may get some useful information about the symptoms, the effects, the what is happening, that the MSM is also talking about, or the mainstream media. But you'll never learn the who, the why, or the how of the story. Never. Never. That is how billions of people are being misled. These big and small channels are either being paid by the CIA-controlled YouTube to censor their content, or they know the truth but avoid confrontation with Rome, knowing their channels will be censored or pulled down. It is possible that some are ignorant of the true power base, but after 15 years of operations, anyone with persistence can find the Jesuits and with research quickly understand that they are the one and only true enemy of mankind. Once again, I'll say beware what you listen to. The Jesuits have flooded YouTube and Facebook with a blanket, and Twitter, with a blanket of lies and deception covering politics, economics, culture, education, and biblical truth. There is a flood of false doctrine today. Do not be deceived by it. Just as Jesus and the apostles warned again and again and again in the New Testament. Do not be deceived. Dear listener, Jesus Christ is the only way, the truth, and the life. It has never changed. There is no other way to the Father of heavenly lights except through his Son, Jesus Christ. If you have not yet repented of your sins and turned away from your rebellion against God, then I urge you now to save yourself, because no one is coming to rescue you from the beast system. No one. Time is running out quickly. I believe there are only weeks until the beast vaccine is rolled out worldwide. Find God now if you're not saved, and get right with him before it's too late. It's my sincere and urgent warning to all who may be listening to this video who have not yet found the Lord Jesus Christ as their God and King. Repent, turn to him, and be saved today. If you cry out to him, he will hear you, and he will answer you and save you. You do not have to die with this one world beast system that is shortly to emerge in all its horrible, horrible brutality. You do not have to be a part of it. You do not have to die with it. Get right with God today. Thank you for listening, and I pray that God will continue to open your eyes as you search for the truth on all things. I'll put pertinent links in the description box below. Please share this information with others as you're able so that many more might be awakened to the reality of this world system. I hope to see you in the next video, but should I be prevented, then I pray God's blessing for you in the perilous days that lie ahead. And if you do seek answers on how to be saved and how to become a Christian, all that is found on my website at darknessisfalling.com. Just go there and read, and you'll find out what it is that God requires of you in order to be saved and in order for you to find eternal life through the Lord Jesus Christ. I thank you, and God bless you. I hope to see you soon.